Hello and welcome to the Beyond podcast. I don't know whether I'm actually going to keep the duck call in there. I usually just put some pink noise over it at that point, but I thought, as I've got a guest and they're very much into this moment, I would do the duck call live. Duck call is something I never explain ever actually on the actual feed itself. Nobody has a clue why I do that. So
you kind of explained it on one of our last.
Yeah, I may have explained it to you, but I've never explained it to my lot. So this introduction's gone horribly wrong. Let's.
Would you like to begin again?
I've got about 4 words in.
I don't know. So this is going to be the end of the episode. It's just you constantly introducing.
I don't know. I might just leave it as this. I mean, I'm notoriously fickle this way.
I'm still a mystery guest. So this is very exciting.
I don't even know mystery. I frequently don't even introduce who I am. I just sort of going, well, come on, you know, do you need to know my name? It's in the show description.
No, you've introduced your podcast, podcast, but you still haven't introduced yourself, in fact.
No.
Begin again, man of mystery.
You know, I've been doing this for 5 years on and on. Actually, no, it's more than that, 6 years. That's 10. Actually, it's about 10 years. And
20, 50 years.
I did this before I was born. I was in the womb.
It's very talented.
Okay, I'm going to pull this back.
We're professional.
We're definitely professionals. You know, most podcasts, what they do is they put this, as you said, at the end of the episode as a little thing at the end. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let this fly, and just say no. This is what you're getting.
Welcome to this half of the series.
Okay,
we're all mad here.
Yes. Welcome to the Beyond podcast, and I'm your host, Robert Crichton. I very rarely say that. I say it on the YouTube channel. I don't say it on the podcast very often. So maybe it would be nice to introduce myself to my loyal listeners by actually saying my name more often than I do. And welcome to this special episode, which is the first, but it's not. It's sort of a continuation of an ongoing crossover with another podcast, and this. So you may get a sensation of being dropped midway through a conversation, which is precisely what you are being done to. We have a specific sort of topic for what we're doing for this episode, but it is very much following on from a series that my guest will be able to talk about more freely. And my guest is, who are you and what is your purpose in life?
Who am I? I'm Jean Valjean. Hello, everybody. My name is Emily C A Synder. Some of you may recognize me as the host of Hamlet to Hamilton, Exploring Verse Drama, where I am your host, Emily C A Synder. So I'm Emily Snyder. I'm so excited to be on your podcast. We kind of have this crossover from Hamlet to Hamilton, where, Rob, you were over with us. As we record this, Colin is furiously editing those sessions, bless. And we were looking at, on my podcast, at some medieval verse texts all the way through to the 1560s, 1540s? Where did
1560. Well, technically we reached 1558.
1558. The summer of 1558. You know, that great old blues song, right?
The queen is dead. Long live the queen.
Ooh. And so now we're coming on over to the Beyond podcast. Mine sounds like I've murdered someone. To continue to see what happens in the swinging 60s for Anglophone verse drama. So for those of you who have come over from Hamlet to Hamilton, hello and welcome to the insanity. You're used to this insanity. You're fine. You're good. For those of you whom I have interrupted in your very staid and academic and wise Beyond podcast, Rob's looking around.
Where are we keeping these staid people?
Well, they haven't stayed, have they? Because otherwise they'd be here. But I'm bum-ching.
If I know as a podcast that had sound effects on cue, I should really have a little paddle at the side. I could do that, drum roll.
Absolutely. So anyway, so we're here to continue looking at verse drama, but now in the time period that your podcast sort of really focuses on, I think. Yeah.
Well, definitely. This is the one where I want your expertise. I want to bring you on to talk about verse.
Yes.
Except when we don't, because it's my podcast.
I can talk about paragraph form. It's fine.
But I thought we have and I do the links will be in the show description. Do go and listen to the podcast in general, and obviously our content in more specific sense. It may be helpful to get to where we are. I'm going to throw the audience in at the deep end, but we've been dancing through. I've just been throwing as many plays as we have had time to do. And it was this thing, when we talked about doing a crossover, we said, we'll just read a few, I'll throw some random bits of text at you 8 hours later. And we've just about hit the 1560s.
Yeah. But it was so cool because it was all, again, like I had this conception that the medieval verse was sort of all rhymey and all tetrameter. And all, we were told it's all mystery plays, all morality plays, and you dispelled all of that. And then we got into like scale tonics, which were just funky and cool and fun, and some 14ers. So I'm very excited because my knowledge as a practitioner, sort of begins and ends with Shakespeare and a few other. Oh, I'm sorry.
Whoa.
I did it. Naughty.
Normally, I'd just edit that out so that never happened, but I think I'm going to keep it in.
Ooh, I got one in for you, Bill. Anyway, begins and ends with the Duckman, and then skips over to contemporary verse. So in some ways, I'm just sitting here grateful to be getting this tour through Anglophone verse drama from the incredibly knowledgeable Rob Crichton here. A sort of bespoke tour.
Well, I mean, I'm going to qualify knowledgeable with. I just have all the text on my hard drive, so it's.
What I sit with academics like every day because I'm here studying at the Shakespeare Institute for my PhD, and I think I could say with some authority, you are way more knowledgeable than you're giving yourself any sort of credit. You may be more knowledgeable than. Yeah, it's certainly broadly knowledgeable, than other folks. They know exactly, perhaps they're Fletcher or they're Beaumont or something like that. And you're like pulling out stuff that no one's ever heard of because it is on your hard drive. So thank heavens, future academics will be singing your praises.
Or cursing my name for the terrible onslaught that I brought on. So anyway,
praise and curse from an academic is the same.
It is pretty much. It can be a vicious world. Okay, anyway. So the reason why I wanted you to look at the 1560s is the 15th, and the title of this episode is going to be 1566 and all that, which is a very, very lazy title, but it's fine. And yeah, it's a really weird decade.
Cool.
It's genuinely weird. And I don't know if it's weird because the plays that survive are just come out of something strange, or if it genuinely is a time of flux. I mean, it is a time of flux. I said the last text we did translation of Seneca with Tras in 1558, which is the year the Queen dies and Elizabeth comes to the throne. So Mary's gone, in with Elizabeth, in with Protestantism. And part of the narrative I was giving you last time, it was a very long time ago we did this narrative.
Shh, no, it wasn't. No. In the editing world, there was not a 6-month Emily fell off the grid. No.
That never happened.
What grid? What? No.
So there's been a bit of religious controversy going on between the two confessions that now exist. And in the early years of Elizabeth, there is a real question about how the cards are going to land. They don't really know. There are a lot of people lobbying for their kind of Protestantism. There are still people who would quite like quite a lot of Catholicism, and we haven't yet. We're still in the early years before the prospect of Elizabeth getting married no longer really being a diplomatic card, and we're before being excommunicated.
Well,
so
but
the world is in flux.
Just to double check, are we starting to get Puritans? We're starting to get other flavors of Protestantism, and the Church of England still hasn't quite solidified.
It really doesn't know what it is yet. Elizabeth has, like her father, has all sorts of, exceptions and thoughts to what some of her own, clergy want. She struggles to get properly. She struggles to get the right clergy for the coronation because they keep refusing to do it. And for various reasons to do with, who's in various positions of power when she comes in. It's a very, and I've just got to qualify this by saying this is a world I only know very murkily, but I'm very aware of how much is at stake, and so there's some very odd bits of theology bouncing around. But one of the most important elements of her early years, and something that she keeps doing, is she really starts trying to get control over thought and what thoughts are allowed to be published and to be spread. So there's been since Henry, I don't know what precise legal mechanism it is. I think it's just a sort of an edict. I don't think it's actually a piece of law that basically says, don't talk about God in plays. Please stop talking about God in plays. Everyone's basically ignored it. But it was, I'm fairly certain it was reinstituted by Edward and again by Mary. And during Mary's reign, there are explicitly plays that are anti-Mary, let alone they're anti-Catholic plays, but they're anti-Mary plays. We know they exist. We don't have them. So Elizabeth goes, we're not having that.
Yeah.
Because if you can legitimately criticize the church, then you're criticizing the head of the church, who is the Queen. That's treason. So that's why, from this point onwards, the mystery cycles really now start to properly die. They have been moderately suppressed. It's been a bit up and down. It's all been tricky. They will keep rumbling on for another decade or two. In some holdouts, it'll keep going for longer, and they take a long time to die. But Elizabeth really makes that, by not dying, that makes sure that thing stays in place.
Let me ask you a question, because it will be during her reign, I realize this is a few centuries on, that stable playhouses are created. So are you suggesting that perhaps what we're going to see in these, as we look at texts from these next few decades, is perhaps people really understanding the usefulness of being more involved in play texts and having them perhaps come from London, where everything's centered to begin with, in the going out?
We are far too ahead of that story.
Too ahead of that. Okay.
There are so many different levels to that. First of all, let's question your definition of playhouse, because there are effectively playhouses. There's certainly very regular playing spaces, and within a few years there will be as close to there will be inns that are much more converted into being theatres, and theatres being effectively being built. So they're not the big circular structures of yore, but there are theatres basically, but they aren't anywhere near as organised, and the theatre companies are not very big. And this is a very important structural thing.
That is interesting, yeah.
Because the theatre companies themselves are still probably orbiting, at this point, maybe six as an average
actors.
Number.
Wow.
For your touring company that pops around and is associated with a household, that seems to be the number we're at. And there's lots of them. There are so many theatre companies. And again, Elizabeth would like there to be fewer. She would like there to be more control over what they're saying. This will come out in the future. You don't need to worry about that today.
Oh, great. What do I know about anything? Great. Okay.
You don't need to know any of that because the changes that Elizabeth starts making take a while to kick in, and
of course, yeah.
and that's more for the 1570s and the 1580s, where some pretty radical changes do start happening. The important thing of this preamble is that if you're not allowed to talk about God, what are you going to talk about? Because most of the plays we've done have been moralities, interludes. They have maybe been very intellectual, but narratively they've been quite similar in terms of the survival. The texts that survive to us have not been very narrative driven.
No, and in fact, it is much more about sort of the giving thought with a vague character overlay, maybe. Yeah, so it is a bit more, what actually comes from England, which is theater in education, than perhaps, narrative and drama, as we would look at it now, with sort of the Aristotelian idea being that, just to go through Aristotle's idea, that he says, first you have plot, then character, then thought. Then dialogue, musical spectacle, in terms of importance. And that's what we might call a drama, where the plot and character are the most important thing. There may or may not be a moral, and certainly that has not been what we've largely seen, with the exception of like some entertainments and things, where it's just kind of silly. But even those, there's still sort of the very naughty personifications and the very nice personifications.
He's talking about virtues and vices here.
Yeah, little bit. But where it's not character and plot so much as it really is moved by the thought, moved by...
Yeah, the plot is almost always the same. I mean, the structure is almost always the same. Again, as far as we have. It's starting to shift. The plays like Gamma Gurton's Needle and some of the plays by Nicholas Udall. And you're seeing plots and narrative becoming more important. And there might be a lot more of that going on. And, of course, we're forgetting biblical drama. They've got plots, but they're not necessarily... But they're not plots where you can be surprised. That's
true. Yeah, what's going to happen next? What will Herod do? Yeah. Oh, Herod's a good guy? What?
Yeah.
Plot twist.
You really can't do that kind of plot twist.
No. Jesus survives.
Yeah. Burnt.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they burnt priests. Yeah, don't do that. So there is a sense of there is a vacuum that potentially needs to be filled. Now this isn't absolute proof or anything, but and I take a lot of what I'm saying with this is broad brush stuff. I'm
very broad.
Throwing out there. But we get this moment at the very beginning of Elizabeth's reign of the translation of Seneca being popular editions coming out, which is where we ended last time.
Right. Well, and again, I'm thinking of The Schoolmaster, which is right around this time, which is so praising the Latin ideas. And when does George Gascoigne come in with his idea of meter? And I'd have to look it up again.
It'll be around. We will have some Gascoigne. He's coming up. He's coming up twice. But, I think you might get him twice. So about now, I will say off the top of my head.
I think so. And yeah, I think Schoolmaster might actually be 1540s. But with this, the fascination of Europe, right, and this sort of disdain for the Anglo-Saxonness in verse is something that is a huge concern, I know, in the mid-1500s, from my point of view, is that the poets and therefore the playwrights are trying to distance themselves from alliteration. They're specifically trying to distance themselves from rhyme. These are things I'm coming in going that I'm going to be looking for. And they're trying to figure out sort of what the English meter is. Well, can English have a meter? And they want it because the Greeks and the Romans and the whole European Latinate language has it. And so we want it too. And that's what George Gascoigne in particular is the one who started that work. And then it was picked up by Philip Sidney. And sort of, they're working on basically how can we be as cool as everyone with a Romance language. in their poetry.
And maybe that's why the 1560s are so weird, because there is a lot more playing around with what verse forms you can
That makes sense.
have.
Makes a lot of sense.
Because whereas earlier, we basically had a lot of plays that were a very loose verse form, what we call doggerel. Because
part of the doggerel was also because the rhymes weren't necessary. A lot of them were wrenched. A lot of them were you sort of mangle a word to get a rhyme. So and this is why in the Schoolmaster he hates rhyme. He hates it. And then part of the doggerel thing too is since English is based on stresses, as they sort of find out in this latter half of the 1500s. Since that's how our meter works, it's not long and short, it's hard and soft. You didn't really have, like, again, the sort of rhythm was a little bit off in earlier stuff because it wasn't as studied of like, why does this work? Why does this feel satisfactory? Why does this not feel satisfactory? These are I'm realizing now, and I'm so excited. This is the decade. These are the decades when all the poets start going, wait a second, let's really look at our language and try to sort out how it functions and when it's pleasing and when it feels like doggerel. But they will throw out babies with bathwater then. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's because we left off with some Seneca. We're going to start off with some not Seneca. So it is Seneca, but it's not Seneca. So we are, because we're in the 1560s, we're going to go with Thyestes, translation of Thyestes here. And I think the interesting thing, particularly about this one, is he decides it wasn't long enough, so he adds a speech at the end, which will just to get your tongue in place. This is Jasper Hayward of blessed memory, a son of John Hayward, and has a very different career path in many ways. I've just given you a few lines just to get your tongue around some 14ers.
Oh, great. So I was wondering, because these look like very long lines. I was like, these have got to be 14ers, right? Definitely doesn't look like pentameter. Okay.
And for the listener at home, these are cold reads, by the way. You've had this for a few hours.
Well, I had this, but I had other things I had to do.
So zero prep. This is classic beyond work here, which is just throwing people in the deep end. There are probably typos in here as well, so it could be all over the place.
Great. This is also classic Hamlet to Hamilton, though. I adore cold reads because they sort of show all the nonsense. Do you know? I'm not going to have done any work to make this sound better. So here we go. Okay. And I'm also just double checking. So Thyestes, is this meant to be a translation of Seneca or an adaptation?
The rest of the play is a translation of Seneca.
Okay.
But he decided it wasn't long enough, so he wrote a bit at the end where Thyestes, who's not had a good day.
Right.
There's a whole...
Well, and Thyestes is related to the house of Atreus.
There's a whole eating thing.
Right. This is one of. Okay, this is a. Okay. Yep. Okay, let's see what happens. Here we go. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'd say this is mostly just to get your tongue in gear.
One for nothing. All right. So Thyestes alone. O king of Dightus dungeon dark and grisly ghosts of hell, that in the deep and dreadful dens of blackest Tartar dwell, where lean and pale diseases lie, where fear and famine are, where discords stand with bleeding brows, where every kind of care, where furies fight in beds of steel and hairs of crawling snakes, where Gorgon grim, where harpies are, and loathes in limbo lakes, where most prodigious ugly things the hollow hell doth hide. If yet a monster more misshaped than all that there do abide, that makes his brood his cursed food, ye all abhor to see. Nor yet the deep avern itself may bide to cover me, nor grisly gates of Pluto's space yet dare themselves to spread, nor gaping ground to swallow him, whom gods and day have sled. Yet break ye out from cursed seats, and here remain with me. Ye need not now to be afeard the air and heaven to see. nor triple-headed Cerberus, thou needst not be affright. The day unknown to thee or see, or else the loathsome light.
And he goes on great lengths.
Yeah, that's fun. I like it. I like it a lot. It's so funny though, because I was getting such an Edgar Allan Poe-ness, because there's a lot of interior rhyme or gestures towards assonant, slant rhyme, things like that, as well as actual like brood and food. That was nice. That was very nice. But yeah, so a lot of repeated vowels, as well as actually having quite a lot of alliteration, which again was one of the things that the schoolmaster was sort of like a no-no with, like, alliteration belongs to the Anglo-Saxons, whereas rhyme belongs to the Romantic languages. And this is a really kind of nice meeting together. It reminds me a bit of, what's the one that we like? The Castle of...
Perseverance.
Yes. Yeah. The only thing I would say, though, is that while these are fantastic images, I've no idea why you say any of this.
Well, to a degree, all you're really saying is I'm having a bit of an off day. I don't normally look as bad as this.
Oh.
I think basically because he's just eaten his
family, right?
His family, and
like you
and
do.
then drunk their blood, and
Right.
So Atreus is just exalted and gone, ha ha ha, look at you, and the translator has added this, I've had a bad day speech.
Right.
And he will now luxuriate in his terrible grief and sadness, but it's sort of starting from that sort of. But I think And again, this is a primarily a literary translation, of course. This is a publication.
But this is playable. This is very playable, and also the meter is very easy to follow. I was worried with a longer line that perhaps it might be difficult. But one of the things that I noticed with 14ers, as now my eye is open for them, thanks to you, in a previous episode you can hear on Hamlet to Hamilton. If you're not subscribed already, go and subscribe on your favorite podcatcher now. But anyway, so I was saying to you yesterday at the Shakespeare Institute, we had a reading of The Knight of the Burning Pestle, where there's a section where Rafe, the titular knight, has a whole section in rhyming 14ers. And when it started, I was like, wait a second, this feels familiar. And I was like, Rob, I cannot wait to tell you about these rhyming 14ers I found in the wild. In the early 1600s, too. I think it was 1607, 1609, something like that.
Somewhere around there, yeah.
Yeah, but clearly meant to evoke this time period. And the other interesting thing about 14ers is that they just are our ballad meter, but put on a single line. Because ballad meter is, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. Well, hold on, what's a 14er? Yeah, it's just it's 4-3, 4-3, 4-3. Okay, so Emily Dickinson famously writes in what we might call 14ers, but it's really, or not really, but it's called ballad meter. And so here we go. Here's the very famous Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson, which goes, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves in immortality. Right? So if we're going to sort of listen for the beats, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. Ta-da! That would be, yeah, ta-da, exactly. Well, and then you have a nice breath on what would be the sort of eighth beat there, right? So it's sort of doing two measures of 4/4, but you breathe on the last breath each time. And that's what a 14er is. The only difference is in its lineation is ballad does a line of 4 and then a line of 3, a line of 4 and then a line of 3, whereas a 14er puts it all on one line.
Well, it's not always printed this way, though. To
really?
be fair, it can be printed. There are different lineations, which causes complications in editions, apparently.
Well, but I think this is important because if there's a line break, I, as an actor, feel like I ought to perform it somehow. And if it's all together, so for example, here we have it all together. O King of Didas, dungeon dark, and grisly ghosts of hell. Even though those are two separate thoughts, because it's all on one line, I feel like I should connect it in some way, right? Sort of keep the tension up and connect it. Whereas I can perform it
with the line break.
With the line break. Yes, do so.
O king of dirtiest dungeon dark, and grisly ghosts of hell, that in the deep and dreadful dens of blackest Tartar dwell, where lean and pale diseases lie, where fear and famine are, where discord stands with bleeding brows, where every kind of car, where furies fight in beds of steel and hairs of crawling snakes.
No, you did that as a single line. That one.
I
Did you
did, but
feel
that's
that?
because, and there is this question of technique and the question of working with Fortinas when you have it en masse, of not getting too, because you can get trapped in that and it can become too regular, and if you're doing it for 2 hours, that can be a problem. So I think that's one of the reasons why people well, I don't know about instinctively, but certainly turn against it, because it's very easy to get trapped in the ta-da at the end of a line, because of what it's doing.
Well,
I don't find that, but that's because I play around with verse.
But at the same, exactly, and variety is the spice of life when you're performing. But it's interesting because if I vaguely remember what we did clearly just like 2 weeks ago, not 6 months ago, but the last 14er we did, I remember feeling very out of breath. So there's something in the way that this is written where I felt much more taken care of in terms of my breathing than I was in the other one. So I'd have to look at the other one to remind myself. But yeah, it's interesting.
Well, it's the same translator. The Senecas are translated by different authors, and they do vary in quality. Some of them are, this one gets published a lot because I think it is one of the better ones, and it is the most performable. It's also about eating people, so it's something everyone can enjoy, and
it's a Sweeney Todd of its day,
It absolutely is, and it's clearly it's got just as original Senecan play. It's actually got a bit of punch to it, which is quite nice. So anyway, so this is this moment that is starting to happen. Now, I should also just point out that lots of people will be writing pseudo-Senecan stuff going forward, but actually almost none of them directly quote from these texts. They've got a good enough education to translate it themselves, don't you know? So it's interesting that they don't. A lot of people don't quote the translations. The translations are popular, and they clearly it's part of a moment. But actually, it's also part of the nature of the education system that's also starting to really kick in and produce results in a way that didn't before. Because there is this big movement to educate lots of people to go to hypothetical jobs that eventually never exist, and it's like the modern education market, frankly.
I was going to say, this feels way too real. Don't say it that way.
There are whole plays about the post university education market. If you've not looked at the Parnassus plays from the early 1600s, they are basically about the post university jobs market is crap. Here I am, I've got a degree, and I'm doing the early modern equivalent of flipping burgers.
They are saying, "Prithee, dost thou want fries with that?"
Yes, pretty much. I am horribly overqualified for this job. Anyway, we shouldn't linger here because this is where we left off.
Okay.
We're never going to get through all of these, don't you?
No. That's I figured it would be many, many sessions because that's how we do it.
So a text I haven't given you, 1560s, just for variety. There are some folk examples of folk plays. There's some Robin Hood plays, of which they're quite fun. We've done them on the podcast. I will simply quote a memorable line from it to give you a sense of its style.
Okay.
When talking about a young lady who has been effectively offered to Friar Tuck as a reward for his services.
Well,
she is described as a pricker, a prancer, a tearer of sheets, a wagger of bollocks wherever men sleeps.
Good for her.
Yeah, good rural. Children's entertainment, that.
Oh my goodness!
Any Robin Hood
somehow.
Any Robin Hood text is basically an excuse for a fight scene. That's it. Other stuff happens. They're really fun, but
Sounds fair.
We're going to move into 1561.
Okay.
We've done 1560. 1561. I mean, so a lot of these dates are wibbly wobbly. They're sort of approximate, but that's where it says on my list, so I'm going with it. And from one slightly problematic text to one that's deeply problemac, Patient Griselle.
I've heard of this. I don't know anything about it, but I've heard of it.
Okay, so it is Meek and Patient and Meek Grizzle is a medieval story of basically husband decides to torture his wife to see how loyal she is.
Oh, this is very shrew-like. That's fun. Okay.
Yeah, so she is a very patient wife. She will basically take all his shit, and then at the end he says, "Ta-da! You have proved yourself to be a." Basically, when we were reading this in the chat, basically the chat was basically kill him. Can we kill him? Let's kill him. Kill him now. I want him to die. So it's not a fun play.
Do you know what though? I can think of many fairy tales that are essentially this plot.
Yes.
And I would have more to say about problematic ways that we train female-bodied people, but perhaps the play will say it for me.
Well, this is a scene. Thank you, Chaucer. This is scene towards the end of the play. I've just given us 3 speeches.
Okay, great.
This is towards the sort of climax. He's done pretty much everything. The Marquis is the husband. He's done pretty much everything horrible.
Got it.
Griselle has a reply, and then there's a vice figure in it called Politic, who is basically one of the people pushing for doing horrible things to her. Again, I don't worry too much about plot. This is just more for the example of the kind of verse this is written in. So we'll just alternate, or just stop and start and see what you like. Do you want to be the Marquis or the patient?
I shall be Patient Griselle, because I do feel that probably this is one where an AFAB versus an AMAB voice might be important. Yeah, let's see what happens.
Okay, so I'm going to start off as the Marquis, and then I will be the Vice afterwards. But then again, there's a wafer-thin difference between the two. Madam, my dear, and spoused mate, attend and give good heed to such words as from me, thy lord, at this time shall proceed. Thou seest our painful plight, our grief full well is shown. Our children's loss is such, each to us apparently is known. Yet cannot death of infants dear appease the bloody mind of nobles all, nor staunch the rage of commons most unkind. But now their rage reverted is to quit me with disdain. They seek, God knows, to banish me from empery and reign. And thou art root of all my grief, my anguish, and my care.
Am I the spring that vexeth thee, my loving lord? Declare. Hath wifely troth, I, failed thee? Hath duty been neglect? Doth any wight that liveth now of these things me suspect? But if I be the cause that reaves thee of thy joy, if I be she, O noble lord, that worketh thine annoy, as my sweet babes at tyrant's hest have died on bloody knife, to swage their rage and win thee grace, spare not thy faithful wife. Let thousand gashes scorch this flesh, let them their rage display, let thousand wounds by stroke of knives take Grizzle's life away.
Body of me, see her gentle disposed mind. How many such wives may a man find, which seeing their husbands oppressed with woe, would willingly offer their lives to forego, to mitigate the husband's pain or ease his grief? Not one, I conjecture. I am so hard of belief. So we've got very different verse forms between the vice character there and the, shall we say, the nobility here.
Right, yeah.
And
nobility doing those 14ers again. But sorry, go on, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but just in sense, it felt, because it's doing plot, because they're talking to each other, it's a very different exercise to the pseudo-Senecan that we just had.
Well, there's some interesting things about this in particular, which is that while it's still in rhyming couplets, the playwright is doing the lovely thing with rhyme in that the rhyme it's just kind of there, but it's not. The second line isn't rhyming just because the first line has to rhyme with something. So you're getting the progression of meaning, sort of almost despite the rhyme. And as you were saying before, he's also not necessarily. This is John Philip, is not necessarily making it 4 and 3 and 4 and 3, that ballad form. There is the sense that you can kind of play with the rhythm a little bit more, even though you're still very much by and large on the rhythm. But yeah, when you come to politic, it was interesting. It's somewhere between tetrameter and pentameter, with like the last one felt, or it was somewhere in there, felt like a hexameter. So it's much looser. In some ways, it's much because it's shorter lines. You feel the rhyme more, so it feels a little bit more like the old morality plays, because the shorter line. Yeah,
it seems straight out of that playbook, and it was really difficult reading the Marquis and then going to politic persuasion and trying to get my tongue around it, because it was like I was in another. This is not my verse form.
Fair. Well, it was very helpful actually to have you start it and sort of give that clue to me as an actor that we're not necessarily going to be punching our way through the 14ers, that we're going to sink a little bit more into the words, which actually is a sign of I think, of a better script, that the words have something that as a character I can sink into.
I mean, the Marquis is doing something really interesting here. Is it just going, it's your fault that the people don't think I'm treating you very well. They're turning. It's such a bit of toxic.
I think the gaslighting is in fact.
The entire plot is gaslighting. Basically, he just says, "Your children are dead, dear," and all the rest of it.
Wow.
And they're effectively they're dead in the sense she doesn't see them again for however many years. So it's cheerful play.
Yes, it's very cool that the nobility, that there's this movement towards, and some success in, sounding a little bit less obvious poetry, even though there still is some internal rhyme in a few places. But there's less audible poetic techniques. So the rhymes feel a little softer. There's less interior rhyme. The meter can be sort of tugged and pulled to sound a little bit more naturalistic. There isn't as much alliteration. All of these are very audible poetic techniques. So it's an interesting shift towards something that's a wee bit more conversational sounding, prosaic sounding, which is just very neat. And I think that is one of the other reasons why politic was a little bit like, oh, it's so suddenly, because it's shorter lines, any sort of audible poetic technique that you're hearing is more audible more frequently. Yeah, so there you are.
So, I mean, a year's passed, so obviously everyone's learned.
That's all it takes. My PhD is in a year, and then done. I don't want to study it anymore. I've learned it all.
It's all done with. Okay, the next text is a bit trickier to date. This is a very weird play. It is The Peddler's Prophecy by almost certainly not Robert Wilson. It gets
everyone else in the world, but not Robert Wilson.
It gets lumped with his work for reasons that seem reasonable, and it gets sometimes a much later date. But it's basically got nothing to do with his later work, apart from an interesting question as to how problematic the text is, because the text is quite odd. You're trying to figure out, is it a satire on awful people, or is it just awful people? And it's actually quite difficult to tell.
So this is the Seinfeld of its day?
Yeah, well, in the UK, it's more it's more the Alf Garnett of its day for my British listeners.
I'm sorry to everyone in England.
No, everyone will get Seinfeld. But Seinfeld, I don't think wasn't doing the political. So
No, it wasn't.
Alf Garnett, there was an American version. I forget what the name of the series was, but basically was a horrible man who sat in the corner, being a bit racist and sexist and all the rest of it, and everybody else. And the joke is in theory on him, but the question is it really?
So it's like All in the Family, much more. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And that's to a degree Robert Wilson. There's the whole problem of how awful is he really, or is it all satire with big air quotes? So there's all sorts of those sort of wibbly wobbly things going on. That I don't think will be apparent here. I just wanted to throw in some text that is perhaps more recognisable from earlier. There's a peddler.
Okay.
He likes selling stones. As you will discover.
Okay.
He's got some pebbles to sell you.
Are they nice pebbles?
As far as he's concerned, they're the best. I think.
Okay.
And there's basically 4 vignettes.
Okay.
In different contexts. Or is it 3 vignettes? Am I getting it wrong? No, 3 vignettes. And the first is he comes and visits a household, a maid, a mother and a father. We won't get that far, but just have a go at his.
Sure. If we get to it, do you want to be the maid then?
Hey, why not?
Oh, right. Very exciting. Okay, so here we are. Oh, do we have any idea about how old this peddler is then?
A young man and a prophet.
Oh, okay then.
According to Wiggins. So that's my
Who is Wiggins?
Do you not know Wiggins?
I do not.
Everybody knows Wiggins.
I am ignorant of Wiggins.
So Wiggins is what everybody calls Catalogue of British Drama, which is edited by Martin Wiggins in association with Catherine Richardson, and it is the most useful of volumes. But it has now become, it's kind of basically everyone just calls it Wiggins.
Got it. Now, we used to have the phrase, give me the Wiggins, which meant a little bit like, I feel weirded out. In America, that was sort of a 80s, 90s phrase that went around. I don't think we were talking about a huge doorstopper of a book about English drama, alas, of Give Me the Wiggins.
Yes, it was going to be 10 volumes. I believe it's now going to be 11.
All right. I mean, you can put that by every draft in your house.
No, that's what the collected Thomas Middleton's for.
All right. So a young man and a prophet, according to Wiggins, and as Wiggins knows all, that's how I shall read The Peddler. Here we are. Oh, this heavy pack. It is so heavy it hath almost broke my back. Weary. Nay, I was never so weary since I passed Carouse Ferry. Time it is to set it down. Would to God I were near some good town. A penny for a pot of drink. I shall die for thirst. Truly, I think, a great way have I gone since I drank. 14 mile beyond the Scottish bank. Few peddlers take such pain. I am fain to buy all my ware in Spain. And because I would have all my ware good, sometimes I pass into Jason's wood. Under the pool, Antarctic there I was. Whereas I spake with the mighty Atlas, of whom for money I had a passport, that through Coelum Imperium I might resort, from thence unto primum mobiloi? It's supposed to rhyme with toy. How's that going to happen? Mobiloi. There bought I a stone I called Idaka Toy, in the which there is a spirit enclosed, whom truly when I am disposed I can tell what is laid or done. From under the constellation of the moon unto the center of the earth indeed, whither I purpose to go with all speed to Cilium Aquinum, I came from thence, and there bestowed I the most of my pence. Yet, to tell you the truth of the matter, I was almost perished with water. Time it was to call for a boat. 3 days in the water, I stood up to the throat. Yet as hard as the world went there to fill up my pack, I bought more gear. There bought I a stone called calibrate. Possibly, that doesn't rhyme with anything. Okay. There bought I a stone called Calbrates. Oh, happy is he that has such a stone. I tell you that thousands cannot get one. For this stone giveth wisdom, honor, and grace, and defendeth from perils in every place. If that with Diostardes you could speak, your mind under him you might break. Then came I to the firmament, and to pass thence I had commandment. Saturn was angry and very fierce. The cause is why I will now rehearse. Jupiter.
You will not now rehearse.
Darn you!
You were getting geared up for that, weren't you?
I was about to begin with Jupiter. All right, I'm not going to rehearse it. What am I going to do? Oh, I don't get it. Okay, Jupiter could not pacify the cause. Then Mars eased them with Stafford laws. Soul engendered such a sort of flies, so that they had almost bitten out mine eyes. Then passed I by Venus, Mercury, and the moon, from whence I came since yesterday at noon. Yet as hard as the world was there to fill up my pack, I bought more gear. A stone I bought which Tenya they call. This stone hath the best property of all, for it will make him to speak that is dumb, and be able to tell of things to come. This stone I bear under my tongue alway, so that I can tell what they do or say. Well up with my pack and get me hence. There is no remedy, I must trudge for small pence. Cunnyskins maid, yonder cometh one, I am well obeyed.
Welcome, pedlar. Hast thou any fine needles here, or any stiff pins, sharp at the point, I pray you?
I have indeed, but they be somewhat dear, such as will break before they will bow. Bow? Not unlike to maidens, for truth to speak, which before they will break, they will bend.
Wisely spoken, John Hoddy Peak. For your thrift and your wit at the good ale you do spend. If thou hast any, at once bring them forth. I may not stand prattling all day with thee.
I tell you, my needles and pins be more worth than you are worthy for your fair looks to see. You will not buy. I know so much of your mind, therefore at this time you shall not have your lust. For if my needles or pins should take any wind, they would canker by and take rust.
Wilt thou have me buy the pig in the poke? I may see for love and buy for money.
Where fire is, a man may perceive by the smoke. Think not but that I know a cat from a coney. Or a cunny.
Etc., etc., etc.
Okay.
Witty back and forth, aplenty. Yes, he's been everywhere. Of course he has.
Maid.
I think, she wants to see the merchandise. She's not going to just buy randomly, is she? She's this isn't her first
I have to tell you
rodeo.
though, if I had to do this piece, I would be so angry at the writer, because it's just a pain in the neck to memorize this speech, I would imagine.
Well, for the listener at home, the speech would, if we handed it to an actor, be properly punctuated, because there's very little indication of when you should actually pause on a thought.
Very true.
They are actually quite doable. It's not. It's just a job that hasn't been done.
But the thing is, the point of it, the story of it is, I have this stone, I've been here, I've been there, I've been here, I've been there, and you don't need to say it with an entire page of text.
I think the point is the Shaggy Dog story of it, and he does expand. He goes into heaven for stuff to trade. This is all obviously true. I'm sure it's absolutely true. I'm sure none of it's made up, and it gets more expansive as he goes on, because he goes out into the into the universe. He goes intergalactic. With his wanderings there, and I'm sure, he manages to paint a picture of the gods, and of course he doesn't need to tell us certain details about that, because we all know about, why Saturn was angry. Of course, you don't need to be told any more about that.
I did like that bit, but probably because I just knew what it was, so I had some idea of what to play. And I do like that it builds from the Scottish bank and this wood and this town and ferry. To larger and larger and larger and larger. But it's interesting because, he does have a sort of, at least from this, a sort of mystic bent. But I realized with that bow, it must need to have rhymed with you, because
it'll be yow.
yeah,
It'll be yow.
yow,
Yow
because
for bow.
yeah, exactly. So what threw me was going from couplets into quatrains, as well as I think the other reason why I'm personally kind of angry at this first speech is because after having the luxury of a 14er, aka it's a bit longer before I get to a rhyme, a necessary rhyme, having these shorter lines, and again, it's not even a it doesn't really feel like a strict repeated beat. So the lines are kind of all over the place. They're not evenly metered. So I felt like I just kept saying setups to rhymes and rhymes. It wasn't as necessary. One line did not necessarily build upon the next the way that actually Patient Grizzle did do that very well, as I rhymed just now. So it felt much more like the medieval shorter lines, much more rhyme, kind of awkwardly metered in performing it. And then it felt much better when we got down actually to the quatrains, in part because the rhymes were softer and also in part because we had something to say to each other.
Yes, we go from set piece stand up routine
Yeah.
to actual dialogue, and there's a bit of banter. And this I mean, it's a shame we can't do more of this. There's tetrameters, alexandrines, pentameters.
Oh, really?
Of different number of syllables on lines. It's very there's a
All
lot of
over the
stuff going
place.
on in this. Apparently,
Why is that? I mean, I suppose we'll find out. Is that common? Because certainly in what I expect from an early modern play, something more in the 1580s, 90s, and 60s, the hits of the 80s, 90s, and today, it's a little bit less, we're in a new bit, so we'll change the music, change the meter, change the rhyme scheme. And here, it seems, at least in this piece, that every time there's sort of a new something, like with musical theater, they're changing the rhyme scheme or changing the meter. Is that right?
yes, and it has
That's exciting.
yes, it has a term which, like all our terms, sort of gets used as a term of abuse eventually, because of what people are like. But yeah, it's medley style.
Medley style.
Which you may have heard. It's sometimes used in slightly different contexts as well. But this idea that you just leap from one to another, to another, to another, to another, to another, and it's common. It's basically it seems to really. People really are playing around. The Senecas are as regular as clockwork once they get into those things.
Seneca as well,
but
right?
this kind of popular drama, we don't know who, we don't know who any of these, who's making any of these shows per se. I mean, we are slowly getting to the point where we're going to be able to start associating plays with companies. And with actors and with patrons, but we're not really there yet. A few exceptions, I think, to that rule.
Okay, well, hold on. So let's pause, because in that case, what we're seeing in the course of what is this, over the course of 2-3 years, right? 1560 and around 61.
Well, we can't. I think we couldn't be too certain about that to make that as a thing.
But at the beginning, what I'm curious to sort of see, I have a theory, and I'm curious to see if it pans out. You know better than I, but who knows? Is since Seneca comes from, because Seneca himself is writing in, is he writing in dactylic hexameter? Is that right?
Oh, don't ask me such questions. I don't know.
Well, it's going to bother me now. I'll have to look it up at some point. I will look it up at some point. But it looks like with Seneca, they are possibly choosing to be much more rigid, as in this is the meter, this is the rhyme scheme, there is a consistency, and that there's a consistency for tragedy, okay, for tragedy or for big epic drama. And then I see this medley form with sort of more common, quotidian, bougie, as it were, bourgeoisie not highfalutin. There's a bit of fun to it, would be my guess. Sort of somewhat comedies, right? And I'm curious about that because that certainly is true by the late 1600s, 1700s into the 1800s, when playwrights are looking at tragedies versus comedies. There's a feeling of you can kind of do whatever you want in a comedy, but a tragedy needs to be of a uniform poetic consistency. Is sort of what will happen in the future. And I'm curious if we're starting to see the beginnings of that here.
That might be a conclusion we could draw. I think we've got to just for clarity is to actually just point out, we've already had, what we might be calling medleys, this kind of medley of verse forms, is basically the norm. I mean, that's the thing or everything we've done. I mean, because we've been cherry picking, we haven't necessarily looked at those things. Right. I'm bringing up more now, so we may be creating a false impression. But the idea, this is the thing I often say, when I used to prod early modernists when I'm saying, well, early modern theatre, it's just atrophied medieval drama, isn't it? And that's the thing I throw in every so often because it's like you've just given up trying to do anything interesting. You're just doing here's our verse. We've found blank verse. It's fine. We'll use that. And it's like, was that it? Really? You're going to mix it up with prose? What about Skeltonics? Come on, guys. Where's a 14er when you need one?
So the story that I've inherited about why iambic pentameter, right? As sort of, I mean, it really is, I would suggest, it has become the English form, and then it's reinforced as the English form by people who want it to be the English form. So, self-fulfilling metric form, I guess. But the story that I've been given by all my various teachers and everyone who sort of, retells it is that the quest was, how can we sound more and more like regular speech and yet still keep it highly structured, highly poetic? And that's where the feeling was, I think, essentially the more audible, this is my theory now, that the more audible the poetry, the less the audience feels that this is everyday speech. The less audible the poetry, the more the audience can be kind of fooled into thinking there might just be something slightly heightened about it, but, it's not necessarily made up. The easier it'll be to suspend the disbelief. And so the story that you get from all the pentameter lovers is that pentameter is the perfect line length for breath in the English language, and sort of comes up with all these different theories. Whereas I don't think we found that, because Patient Grisel, and even Thyestes, I didn't feel that I was losing my breath on these 14er lines. And with Patient Grisel, because the commas were in different places, it wasn't always exactly at a center caesura, we could read it a bit more sort of pseudo-realistically and whatnot. But with medley, since medley is behaving, to my mind, so much like spoken musical, where in fact you're going to have a different meter depending on what's happening, at any given time. And since everything has to be rhymed, you're going to be hearing rhyme different, because the length of a line affects how soon you hear a rhyme. And so even if you have something that is sort of common, like the peddler, the audience is going to be aware of more sort of that this is a spoken musical. This is trying to be what we would do with it now is we would make it into a musical. And in fact, that's what they did start doing, especially in the 1600s, was taking this stuff and turning it into musicals. So it's just interesting to see that, again, we sort of come up with like reasons and meanings and then tell each other, this is the story. This is what we all think is true, so this is what you must do to make it true. And
that's the danger, isn't it? Is that you want to create a story when, of course, it's to a degree, there's just an awful lot of people writing stuff, and we don't have enough data to really
Yes.
construct a proper story out of this. I mean,
Yes.
I think having gone through all of the text, there are certain received wisdoms that are perfectly reasonable. I think the arrival of public facing Seneca translation made a big difference, I think, to the public audience for that kind of thing. Even if, I say, there's very little evidence that anyone who wrote things quoted from those translations, they just went back to Seneca themselves.
Right.
But that became something embedded in the culture in a really important way. And obviously blank verse will become embedded in the culture in a very important way. But it might just be a thing at the moment that would just seem cool. And maybe we're overthinking this.
Well, in the same, I mean, it's very true. But then you also see things like Hamilton, and it's a flashpoint of a popular hip opera. Not that it was the first one that was a hip opera. There are other hip operas prior to it, but this revolutionized things. And now, for example, you have Treason, which is a hip opera about the gunpowder plot on the West End at the moment that is very much trying to be Hamilton. And it's not the only one that's trying to be historical hip opera. It must be a thing, is kind of what people think. So, yeah, you're right. Sometimes it's just people doing things, and then sometimes it's people going, ooh, that must be a thing.
Yes. I say, a lot of the obvious stepping stones that we're told about, I think, are perfectly reasonable stepping stones. I'm not really going against orthodoxy, but I think one of the problems whenever anyone's talking about because they talk about medley also when they're talking about Queen's Men, are just about the kind of action they have as well and the kind of staging things, is this idea that medley becomes this term of abuse because it sort of becomes this idea of just mess.
Spaghetti against a wall.
Yeah,
See what sticks,
it's just that there isn't structure to this on some level. That there isn't, that people don't know what they're doing necessarily, because we don't necessarily know what they're trying to do, which is, I think, a very important question to try and answer, even if we can never definitively say what they're trying to do. You can sort of argue what a text is broadly trying to do, what its centre of gravity is. Talking of which,
great,
we're still in 1561. I'm just going to give it just
big year.
Well, it isn't really. I mean, we have handfuls of plays here and there for each year's at this stage. In about 30 years' time, it'll be 10 plays a year minimum, and you'll just be going, "Oh, go away! There's too much stuff. Leave me alone." It's a meat grinder out there in the 17th century.
Rob, you'd be out there just burning plays, just like, we're not saving this, we're not saving this.
I am the reincarnation of Mr. Warburton's servant.
Bless.
Anyway.
Okay.
Right. So we'll just do a few lines of this. Because there's only two of us. So this is Tom Tyler and his wife. So we've had someone treating his wife appallingly. Now we can have a wife treating their husband appallingly.
I did much better.
It's a very interesting text of which I haven't fully, but it has been performed in modern times. There is a lot to be discussed about it. But anyway, this is just for its verse styling.
It'd be a very interesting double feature, though. Could you imagine in rep? Just
makes note on envelope. Domestic violence season.
Golly. Right. So Tom Tyler and his wife.
Yes,
chose it.
please.
I could see. Yeah. Who do you want me to be? I don't care.
You can be sturdy or strife. We're only doing a few lines. We're not going to. We're not going to do all of this. Just get a sense.
I'll
of it.
be strife.
Okie dokie. I'll be sturdy.
Great. Okay.
Godspeed, gossip strife.
Well met, good wife sturdy, both welcome and worthy, and ever I thank ye.
I pray you go prank ye are Jew old huddle.
The pig's in the puddle, but now welcome indeed, and ye be agreed. Let's have some chat.
Marry, why not? For I am come hither to gossip together, for I drank not today.
So I hear say, but I tell you true, I thought not of you. Yet the alewife of the Swan is filling the can with spice that is fine, and pot shall be thine, if that thou wilt tarry.
Why, yes, by St. Mary, else I were a fool.
Oh, that's adorable.
There's a lot, and if you scroll down there is more of this kind of thing, and it dances around a lot. It's all over, and there are songs as well, which creates interesting other questions about verse, because we're not talking about verse within songs within plays as well.
We're not talking about exactly. We're not talking about any sort of sung verse. Yeah, we're just doing spoken verse. Oh, but this is so delightful. I was a little worried when I first saw it because I was like, oh, dag, these are incredibly short lines. So much rhyming. The rhymes all over the place. But, we had just mentioned Hamilton, and this feels much more, and I mean this in a good way, sing-songy. It's delightful rhyme, and it feels, in fact, like a gossip in a very fun way. It's capturing that spirit beautifully. Now, I have a question just about lineation. So, for example, well met, good wife, sturdy, both welcome and worthy is one line, and yet it could have been two. Do you happen to know?
It's sometimes printed as separate lines.
It's just sort of
Q prints some of the Skeltonics, because this is effectively Skeltonics.
Yes, that's what it felt like. Yeah,
with two to a line. But they should really be separate lines.
Okay. Well, again, because, when it's all together, I feel the urge to honor that as opposed to when it's separate, which is just sort of
the pigs in the puddle.
Interesting. Well, you know what it is? I don't know why. So cute. I don't know why, but I feel like an interior rhyme functions different than an end rhyme. And I can't, I don't know any more than the past three things we've done have had interior rhyme and end rhyme, and the interior rhyme just feels a little bit more like water flowy, whereas the end rhyme feels a bit more like a stomp. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like dancers would understand. Like you could do the same move, and it's just where's the emphasis sort of hitting more.
Yeah, well, you're pivoting rather than going thunk.
Yes, yeah. So it's interesting. So basically, editors are just trying to figure out. They're just kind of making choices.
Yeah, and it's probably just to do with how much room they got
on the page,
how much paper they've got for this, because it's not a very long play. So it's I think eventually three of the wives together all sit down, have a few cans, and then decide to beat the living daylights out of Tom Tyler. It's not one-on-one. It is a gang beating.
It's a game. Does Tom Tyler deserve it at all?
He's a feckless, useless so and so. I mean, there's lots of questions about it. Again, it's one of those ones we sort of did a flyby and haven't returned to yet. But it has. There is a video version online, a recording of a production that was done. I've got to remember all these notes for links in the show description. But broadly speaking, just go to our timeline page and follow down. All the stuff will be there. So I might just do that.
But so you know what's one of the things, and I don't remember if this happened in the Skeltonics as well. I think it might have. One of the things that makes this rhyming so much fun is that most of the rhymes are two-syllable rhymes. Sturdy, worthy, thanky, pranky, huddle, puddle, indeed, agreed, some chat, why not, hither, together, today, hearsay. So you get a bit more bounciness than just I'm landing. And actually, for those of you who know John Barton in particular, and the playing the duck, I stopped myself playing the Duckman series. But he talks about trying to keep the energy up from line to line. And I think a double rhyme sort of energizes more than a monosyllabic rhyme does. Because it's trickier to do, and therefore hitting it, finding something that rhymes with it, the audience can't be as ahead of it necessarily. And second, there's kind of an upbeat, there's just an upbeat feel to it. It gives you an oomph in a way that I'm just hitting gives you a bit of a stop. So so this is that was like wicked fun.
Now, I don't think we've got an author for Tom Tyler, but we have already mentioned a few authors' or at least one author's name so far. Yes, a few authors' names. And this is becoming a trend now. We're starting to figure out who. It's not inevitable. Printing of names is still not always a major selling point. It's not going to be for a while, and the printing of plays is still a sort of very ad hoc thing. A lot of plays are being printed potentially with a nod to the amateur market, because they will print a lot of these plays that we're doing at the moment. They will be printed with 4 may easily play this play, and it will have a little doubling chart that doesn't work.
Oh no!
It will be a totally fictitious doubling chart that has nothing to do with the ability to perform the play. It's just
lies and deception.
Yeah, it's just the publisher's gone, hi, everyday Spanish for beginners, 5 easy steps. You too will be able to take apart a car and put it back together again if you follow these careful instructions. Google translated from Japanese, and it's that kind of thing. So there's definitely an appeal for an amateur market out there, or maybe people reading at home. Sometimes the doubling scheme looks like it sort of works if you're not having to change costumes, but you can
just change hats.
You can, well, yeah, just but because you're reading it, you can follow. Okay. You can follow like we do when we do our exploring sessions. There isn't a logic to the doubling. It's just who's no longer reading, and that's the way it works. We're getting more authors. There's an idea that has been established. The kind of plays that are getting printed still tend to be morality plays a lot of the time. And we're getting a lot of old stock. We're getting plays that were written under Edward or Mary, and it's clear from the denomination of the play that they've changed who the queen is at the end.
Interesting.
And things like that. So in fact, some of the plays we looked at last time
were printed now.
It's pretty much all of it was printed around about now.
Okay.
And may date from more around now. Some of those datings were a bit wibbly wobbly. So there's still lots more doggerel out there that we're sitting on top
heavens.
of. We're still sitting on a lot of verse that is not very regular, and the playwright doesn't care. And it does what it does. Okay, we're now going to hit one of those big ones. Let's do the big one.
I see it, and oh my goodness! So I saw it, and so one of the interesting things. So this is it Gorbaduck or Gorbaduke?
It's pronounced Gorba.
You were hoping I set you up for that, and I didn't even know it.
Yes. I generally say Gorbaduck, but
well, that's what we'll say on here then.
Yeah. But I am no presenter of how to say anything. I've destroyed my ability to say names in the early modern period.
Well, and I am American, so what do I know?
But it's by Thomas Norton and Thomas Sackville, the Thomases, two very important Thomases who have form writing tragic verse, but not necessarily actually on stage, and there's lots of stuff to say about Gorbaduck. But your thoughts on this monumentally important play in theory?
It is monumentally
trademark.
Well, so the interesting thing is I've actually never read it in full. I have read it's terrible. I've sort of read the first act in one of our episodes for Hamlet to Hamilton. I think it was possibly on Schwoof, season 1. Just looking at the energy of the line or the lack thereof. But my understanding is that it's terribly important because it introduces not only iambic pentameter, but I think more importantly, blank verse. People tend to think that blank verse and iambic pentameter are the same thing. That is not true. Although colloquially, yes, it is used as interchangeable synonyms, but actually blank verse means that it is not rhymed. So you have rhymed verse and you have blank verse, right? So you could have blank verse that has a meter, that has any sort of meter, that has no meter. So a lot of free verse that you see, internet poetry, is blank verse. It doesn't have rhyme. And again, I've been talking, who knows, maybe this is a new episode now, in which case, hello, I'm Emily C A Synder from Hamlet to Hamilton. But we've been looking at the different rhyme schemes and how they work and how they don't. And I'm excited to have done a lot of rhyme today and now try out some Gorboduc, because the thing is, the audience is not reading the play necessarily, they're listening. But this particular play, so you'll tell me more about whether it's performed or not, but my understanding is that it's more like it became such a thing among university students. They were passing it around and they were very much influenced by it. And then in turn, that influenced the playwrights that came out of university. And then those playwrights in turn influenced everyone who was writing, who perhaps didn't go to university, but was here in Stratford-upon-Avon with swans. So and then influenced ad infinitum in the English language, much to the amount that I can't stand it. But yeah, that this is considered sort of the influential iambic pentameter / blank verse. And since the two things were together, my understanding is that people went, oh, that's the trick. That's what we've been looking for. How do we do realistic sounding poetic speech? It's using iambic pentameter and it's using blank verse. Let's find, I don't know, let's find out whether it feels realistic after everything else. Because I got to be honest, that one that we just did, the Tom Tyler and his wife, felt realistic as well. I mean, it felt fun. It felt like characters.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. So first of all, we've got sort of prior to this. I think we should bring up a book. I know, not a play, but I think we should absolutely bring up A Mirror for Magistrates, which was a hugely successful book in the around about now, and which, you know, these two things sort of orbit each other in interesting ways, I'm not sure precisely what predates or postdates, and I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head which of the Thomases wrote for it.
So I'm looking at the Wikipedia page right now.
Are you now?
Let's see. We have a Thomas March Fair, Chalciner Churchyard, one poem by John Skelton. Thomas Sackville. Traditionally, the
Sackville.
impetus and planning for the entire work have been ascribed to Thomas Sackville.
Okay,
as he was only 18 years old at the time of the first edition. That seems unlikely.
No, it's not. No, okay, that's nonsense.
Great.
Let's move away from nonsense. But it's Sackville. Sackville is the name I just wanted to pluck out.
Great.
So, Mirror for Magistrates. It was a book, broadly speaking, started by William Baldwin. He is the one who wrote basically probably most of the first one. I'm sure their opinions vary. In theory, it's a composite work written by about 7 people, and the book is an editorial meeting about history, and then they conjure up ghosts of dead figures from history, and then those are the poems that the book is full of. And Sackville writes for the second edition something that is very like this. He's got a style. And it's also very like the Spanish tragedy later on. So the question about how influential Gorboduc is, and how influential this is part, and also the influence of Senecan translation at the same time. So it's not so much this individually as a work is the most important thing in the universe. It's part of a movement, and it's a complicated movement. So it's originally performed in January.
Is originally performed.
Gorboduc is originally performed in 1561. It's January, so it's still 1561. Modern dating, it would be 1562, but New Year's not till March.
Gotcha.
I'm
Okay.
old
As in
school. It's 1561 still.
April Fool. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is performed. It's a student production. It's performed by the Inner Temple. It is performed as well for the Queen, and the text we have is not quite the same. It is published later on. About 3 years later, it is published, and there is a substituted scene. We know there's a substituted scene because the scene, as described by an eyewitness, the scene which is all about how a certain queen should marry not this person who came from overseas, but this person who's in the room over there, hint, 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 has been swapped out. And that's one of those things about politics, whereas you can say things directly to the Queen in the room, but you can't print it publicly, and that is dangerous. It is a play, and this is something that seems to happen with these university Inns of Court plays. It's often that they're written by multiple hands. This has got two Thomases writing it. And so there is a very clear set of who wrote what bit, and we know who wrote what bit. And then there's also authors of dumb shows, because this has dumb shows as well.
Well, I mean, you want to give them something to see.
And we have several really nice examples of looking at that division of labour, but also of people rewriting other people's work later on, and sometimes during the show, someone coming on and saying their own version of a speech that they'd rather do instead of the one that the author wrote. And, it's difficult to know precisely what the forms looked before Gorboduc and what form, but obviously it's very heavily influenced by Seneca. That's what this, and it's neoclassical in its structure.
Yes.
It is telling a story in a very specific way. It is very schematic, and I love it. I'm just gonna put that out there. I'm gonna say it's one of my favourite plays.
Well, I'm looking very quickly at this, and I'm seeing already much more rhetoric than I've seen, I feel, in most anything else you've shown me thus far. So I'm just going to put a pin in that.
Neoclassical works will have a thesis. So again, a bit like a morality play, it will have a thesis. Often each individual scene may have an argument that they're trying to put forward. The argument of Gorboduc is simply, don't divide the kingdom. Just don't do it. And division of all sorts are progressively shown through the play. And it's apocalyptic, because it basically ends with everybody's society has collapsed. And it's post-apocalyptic wilderness by the end. This stuff happens in this play. It's a lot more dynamic than it looks. I know it's full of lots of long speeches, but that's neoclassical. Yes. That is neoclassical tragedy for you.
Yeah, and I'm also noticing there's no shared lines here, which I think is something, or
there might be later
really.
on. I'll have a little look.
The to whom, even to, well, let me put it this way. In the last thing there are. Okay. But even so...
Will you get any stichomythia? That's the question.
Oh, no, I could see it that we have stichomythia already. In this section that we have. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. Stichomythia with rhetorical devices. This is very much a duologue, which is very nice.
It moves on to a big, big chunky speech, but you're not doing that today.
Thank you. I just always find it fascinating.
Not chunky at all. No.
There's an increase in shared lines. And actually that makes sense to have an increase in shared lines the more you get rigid with your meter.
I disagree with that. We've got plenty of shared lines in plays like Res Publica is full of them. And I think it's to do with the kind of ability to rehearse.
Oh, of course.
So if you've got a group of young boys who you are effectively tutor to, you can drill them to within an inch of their life to get them cue perfect. If you're a bunch of students who occasionally meet on a Thursday and you've got to get this show together, you give them big speeches.
Well, also,
and, really, really chunky, straightforward cues, which is something that we will be perhaps seeing more of. So it's not so much that it's something that emerges, it's something that emerges in different contexts.
You know what, you're absolutely right. It is about rehearsal. Okay, great. Okay, and people are getting sides and whatnot. So yeah, just
Though sometimes it's just the writer likes long speeches.
or maybe the actor demanded one. You never know.
Not impossible.
Okay, so let's take a look at this.
Okay, I think you should be Videnna. I think I should be
Okay.
Ferrix. I think that seems...
Sounds great. That sounds fair.
Yeah, you're not bitter at all.
Who am I?
You are the Queen of England, or Britain.
it.
No, it's Great Britain, remember. We're pre-England. England doesn't exist yet. Your husband is Gorboduc. I am your eldest son.
Yes.
And there is, and basically this is the opening of the play, so this
Great.
should unpack what is going on
Oh, fantastic.
to a degree. I mean, depending on how much text I gave you.
All right. Here we go. You ready? The silent night that brings the quiet pause from painful travels of the weary day prolongs my careful thoughts and makes me blame the slow aurora that so for love or shame doth long delay to show her blushing face, and now the day renews my griefful plaint.
My gracious lady and my mother dear, pardon my grief for your so grieved mind to ask what cause tormenteth so your heart.
So great a wrong and so unjust despite, without all cause, against all course of kind.
Such causeless wrong and so unjust despite may have redress or at the least revenge.
Neither, my son. Such is the froward will, the person such my mishap and thine.
Mine I know I none, but grief of your distress.
Yes, mine for thine, my son. A father? No. In kind a father, but not in kindliness.
My father, why I know nothing at all wherein I have misdone unto his grace.
Therefore the more unkind to thee and me, for knowing well, my son, the tender love that I have ever borne and bear to thee. He, grieved thereat, is not content alone to spoil thee of my sight, my chiefest joy, but thee, of thy birthright and heritage, causeless, unkindly, and in wrongful wise against all law and right he will bereave. Half of his kingdom he will give away.
To whom?
Even to Porix, his younger son, whose growing pride I do so sore suspect, that being raised to equal rule with thee, methinks I see his envious heart to swell, filled with disdain and with ambitious pride. The end the gods do know, whose altars I full oft have made in vain of cattle slain, to send the sacred smoke to heaven's throne. For thee, my son, if things do so succeed, as now my jealous mind misdeemeth sore.
Madam, leave care and careful plaint for me. Just hath my father been to every wight. His first injustice he will not extend to me, I trust, that give no cause thereof. My brother's pride shall hurt himself, not me.
So grant the gods. But yet thy father so hath firmly fixed his unmoved mind, that plaints and prayers can no whit avail. For those have I essayed. But even this day he will endeavour to procure assent of all his counsel to his fond device.
Their ancestors from race to race have borne true faith to my forefathers, and their seed, I trust they eke will bear the like to me.
There resteth all. But if they fail thereof, and if the end bring forth an ill success on them, and theirs the mischief shall befall. And so I pray the gods requite them, and so they will. For so is wont to be when lords and trusted rulers under kings, to please the present fancy of the prince, with wrong transpose the course of governance, murders, mischief, or civil sword at length, or mutual treason, or a just revenge, when right succeeding line returns again by Jove's just judgment and deserved wrath, brings them to cruel and reproachful death, and roots their names and kindreds from the earth.
Mother, content you, you shall see the end.
The end? Thy end, I fear. Jove end me first. Hey! Hey! Okay, yeah, there's a bit more in it than when I was just doing some of the speeches. Some of the speeches were killing me. But this duologue is really... quite good.
And it follows after this dumb show of the breaking of sticks. You break an individual stick, and then and it's all about splitting and there is genuine, and there is though we don't see them very often, they do have a little journey between scenes, and it doesn't end well for them. Let's just say nobody lives to see the end of this play. In real terms, there are some characters we meet later on. They survive, but they're to survive in the apocalyptic wilderness that follows. Right.
Do you know what though? I kept feeling like I was going to trip because there wasn't a rhyme. After doing, because we've been at this for almost 2 hours today. Well, maybe a little bit less because my internet went stupid. But which is to say, even just a good hour and a bit of doing rhyme, my brain kept like popping towards the end of the line going, oh, don't I need to make this fit with something? Don't I need to set up for something? And going, no, I don't. And therefore, I was finding, again, speaking of John Barton Peter Hall's approach to verse, instead of feeling the sort of hill that or sort of curious wave, but often it's a hill with rhymed verse where I feel like I climb up, the meaning is in the middle, and then I hit a rhyme. And then I climb up the hill and the meaning's in the middle, and then I hit a rhyme. This was, in fact, inviting the sort of dive into the line and still come out somewhat strong. It's interesting. There are some rhymes here, but it's not important. It's much more actually about what I would call chiming, which is rhetorical repetitions. So this is where we get the rhetoric of, for example, at the beginning. So great or wrong and so unjust despite, without all cause against all course of kind. So this is a stickamithia, as in 2 lines and 2 lines. And then you say such causeless wrong and so unjust despite. So great or wrong and so unjust despite, I say such causeless wrong and so unjust despite, you say. And the repetition of words to get their meaning out, such as the ending line here, the end, thy end, I fear, Jove end, me first, coming off of your mother content you, you shall see the end, is lovely. And yet we also see, again, if there is rhyme, because we've got wrath, death, earth, which I imagine would sound closer if I weren't American. Well, but it's certainly got assonance. Let's put it that way. Deserved wrath, reproachful death from the earth. Death and earth seem to always want to rhyme in these earlier texts. And so we have that sort of maintaining of rhyme to show something definitive. Let's put it that way.
Well,
right?
It's rhyme to say that here's the end of the scene.
Well, right, but that's not the only way to use rhyme, even in early modern. Although certainly it's here, and I imagine that many people picked it up that way. This is a nice way to end a scene when you don't have a curtain and you don't have lights, and you want people to know that we're sort of... and you notice it's a monosyllabic rhyme. It's not a bouncy di or trisyllabic rhyme. So you get that oomph, oomph feeling that we were talking about before, versus... what was it? Huddle, puddle, things like that, sort of bouncy rhymes. But yeah, I kept feeling like maybe I was doing something wrong. And so I'm wondering, what did those early actors feel? Because performing it, I'm like, am I allowed to do? I was really feeling very transgressive. I'm like, am I allowed to not be rhyming? Like, surely I
am not aware, as in French theatre, of a riot starting because of blank verse. I am not aware of that kind of thing. And these whether again this is sort of the problem. This is a celebrated text. It is a text we know of. That doesn't mean that there aren't every year at the Inns of Court there were during a Christmas revels you could have 4 or 5 plays potentially going on in all different styles and genres. And
there was no Netflix. You got to do something.
You've got absolutely, and so there could be dozens of these that we don't know about. But because this was performed before the Queen and then was printed very successfully at this
Right.
cultural moment when that isn't to deny the step change that you have with this text. I mean, you can't really ignore that this is totally different to.
It feels different.
Yeah. Even though we can say we did Seneca earlier, that's 2 years earlier, and at this same time, and thematically, but in terms of what it is doing textually, this feels like people are having a proper conversation here, and that there are. It
really does. It really does. Well, but I'm thinking again, honestly. Okay, so honestly, I do think that blank verse versus rhyme verse really makes a difference here. Because we had the rhyme verse of but 14ers of Patient Griseld, and that felt closer to realistic speech. We could sort of play things. This one, Gorboduc, the meter was very insistent. I had difficulty sort of not hitting, a very steady heartbeat there, a very isochronic beat. The way it was easier to pull things apart in Griseld. But the lack of rhyme, and therefore a sort of more obvious enjambment possibility, so overspilling the line more obviously, really allowed that conversational feeling, that closer to reality feeling. And I'm thinking, in fact, of my own play, The Other Woman, wherein the first half hour is written in rhyming couplets, and then it's about an emotional affair. The guy who's about to start an emotional affair suddenly stops rhyming and says, "Can we talk like people?" and starts speaking in blank verse. And whenever it's performed, when he says, "Can we speak like people?" you can feel the audience, like all their stomachs just drop. And then you can feel them waiting all through his next like little speech for a rhyme to pop up, and it doesn't. And so people feel the difference between rhyme and not rhyme.
So we've just done something from 1561, the very beginning of 1562. It's not in print yet, so we're going to go to 1563-ish. Again, this is one of those date period times. It's about 10 years, it could be. But, if Wiggins says it's around about here, that'll do. He says he's actually very precise. He says it's spring 1563. I assume that there's some sense of what time of year it's supposed to be. But this is The Most Virtuous and Godly Susanna by Thomas Garter. Wow. And it's another chunky play. Obviously,
by chunky play you mean
it's a decent length. It's a couple of hours. It's this is the other thing about plays that are long, rather than potentially much shorter interludes. These Gorboduc is a chunky play, but it's not actually as chunky as you think. It's about 2 hours, depending on how long you do your dumb shows and whether your verse speakers know not to be sad slowly. You've still got to do the dynamics. So this is doing a similarly depressing sort of piece of work, as it were, but in a very different tone and a different feel. And I think it's not fair to give you the prologue. I'll give you the devil. Would you like to be the devil?
I would love to be the devil.
And I'll be ill report.
And I thank you, because I was looking at a bit of this and going, oof, okay.
Well, what I'll do is I'll top and tail the prologue a bit, just so you get a sense of the verse. So I'll do I'll head for a full stop, and then I'll skip down towards the end and give you a cue in for the devil.
Although look at this, we have a prologue, a devil, ill report. I mean, we're right back where we began, aren't we?
Exactly. It's like nothing has changed because nothing has.
All right, here we go.
Bonus opus laudabila, which is as much to say, good works, though plain, are worthy praise, and so have been alway. Then, though with Bullus Tully style our author do not frame, this his first work, which you shall hear, yet do accept the same, for why the story being good, the matter also true, doth but declare a matter old as it were done anew, and showeth forth how prone God is to help such as are just, and that in God before all men do put assured trust. Of Susan's life the story is, what trouble she was in, how narrowly she scaped death because she would not sin, how wondrously she was provoked, how lecherously she fled the strong assaults of wicked men that lecherous lusts had led to ravish her and to pollute her chaste and wifely view. This is the sum of all that shall be showed unto you. And though perchance some wanton word do pass, which may not seem of gestures light, not meet for this, your wisdoms may not deem, accompt that naught delights the heart of man on earth, so much as matters grave and sad, if they be mixed with mirth, of both which here I trust you shall, as in a mirror see, and that in such a decent sort as hurtful shall not be. And for because ensample good is meet in these our days, this hath he done to shorten time, to God give all the praise. Thus, craving quiet silence now, my speech I mean to spare. Behold, when Satan enters place, his mind he will declare.
Among the plagues of thee, O God, wherewith thou plaguest man, plagues such as I would have thee plague, or let me, if I can. I wallow now in worldly wealth, and have the world at will. Into each heart I creep, by stealth of blood I have my fill. But yet there is a wight in thee, O Babylon, whose flesh or fleece, if I may get, how well were I begone to seek her out myself, or to attempt her grace. I might perchance have had my prey, so ugly is my face. Well, I have a crafty child. His name is Ill Report, a blessed babe that I have trained to talk in such a sort, that she were never so just or true, or liver never so chaste. By hook or crook, by trace or pace, he brings her home at last. I sitteth down in a chair, and I call it for ill report.
Yes, you call for ill report.
What evil report, thou crooked knave? What canst thou not hear thy dad? Come with a proper pestilence, I think the thief be mad.
What quoth he now by this day? I think thee mad to be. Now say you all within this hall, what knave more crooked than he? Why, you shitten slave, you crooked-nosed knave, what are thy wits now past? What moved thee with ill report to call in such a haste?
Oh, son.
Oh, thief.
Oh, boy.
Oh, knave.
I have a cheer for thee to do.
God's wounds more cheers yet. I must cheer abroad, and you must you in chair must sit.
That's cute. Oh, loving boy and a dainty child, as ever thou didst me good, let me now crave thy good advice to help me in this mood. Thou seest I have what I desire in all the country here. Yet there is one in Babylon that never had no peer. She serveth God, and on him sets her study and her care.
Gog's wounds thou liest, I trow. Such gifts be very rare.
Oh, son, it is true indeed. I would it were a lie. I would sing, I would dance, oh, I would skip full high.
Oh, say you now, my masters all, think you my dad's not light? If you mark him, he is indeed to dancing trimly plight. I dare now swear 1,000 oaths, and eke as many more. You never saw such a one behind as my dad is before. But Dad, what would you have me do herein?
Why, knave, thou wilt not hear me how I begin?
So, it's like we've just, nothing has actually in the world changed.
Yeah. Well, I will say this is very easy to read. It feels much more Dr. Seussian. And I mean that in a good way, insofar as like it's very easy, it's very buoyant, it's very fun. But it is so very as well. Wow. It feels comfortable because we've now had so much time doing this sort of thing. Where again, therefore, it makes Gorboduc feel that much more transgressive and exciting.
But I say it's been 2 years. Yeah. It's been 2 years, and Gorboduc, and I say because it hasn't been printed yet, effectively Gorboduc doesn't exist.
Right.
And other literary things. I mean, again, that's not to say there aren't Gorboducs bouncing about and just not surviving.
Right,
but the
right.
world does not change quickly. This is still the world we're in, and it's still doing lots of interesting. This is a very weird play again, in that we have the story of Susanna.
Right, but I'm seeing the medley thing as I'm looking down. It keeps changing meter. It keeps changing rhyme scheme. I mean, it feels very good. It feels very natural and very well written. So you're saying that with this, well, it's Susanna who's being tempted. It's not a guy. That's exciting to begin with.
No. It is. They are tempting her by seeing that basically they're going to the elders watch her while she's washing and then proposition her, and then she says go away because she is not sinful, and so they then say that she's a whore, and eventually the rulers find out that these elders are sinful, and then we have the comedy stoning.
Oh, what of Susanna?
Of the elders, the clown, effectively the clown.
Oh, right, because this is the story of Susanna from the Bible.
Yes. So you could argue this is a mystery play. It's not.
I think it's
in that logic.
Yeah, absolutely, an argument that way. Yeah.
But I say at the ending it is a comedy. It is a comedy. He picks up a stone. He drops it on his foot. Ow, ow, ow. Before they do it. And it has to be said, we read this immediately after doing Patient Griselle, and we did think if we just put the comedy stoning in for the Marquis at the end of Patient Griselle, that would solve all our problems.
Sorted.
Yeah.
Done. Tick. Fixed.
There are quite a few plays we might want to use the stoning from. Actually, it has to be said. I mean, we're not a violent group normally. It has to be said. We are.
No, but there are people that in Evil Husbands.
Yeah.
Maybe
well, within a suitably controlled dramatic environment, that such catharsis can be oddly beneficial.
Yes.
So we have explored these opening years of the 1560s. We have bounced off some of the really the obvious things, the things that everybody talks about, and they are not untrue. But the world hasn't noticed in a noticeable way yet, or at least we don't have evidence per se that the world notices. But you can take a very serious subject like the most virtuous and godly Susanna and present something that is quite jovial.
Yes, you're right.
Gorboduc is unremittingly depressing, is Gorboduc. There is no comedy in it at all. Whereas this is an interesting question. Is at what point does the drama happen? And the interest. I mean, there is. It's still uncomfortable, but it also is doing a different job.
Yeah. I'm just I am having, I think, the experience though of those who did witness Gorboduc, and going, hold on, wait, I want a little bit more of that. Like, come back to that. And it's so funny because I live my whole life, right, where in contemporary verse drama, to have something rhyming and spoken, not sung, rhyming is not the norm in Anglophone verse drama now, and it hasn't been for centuries. And so that's the thing that usually if I hear it, I'm like, ooh, oh my goodness, she rhymed. But now, having gone through this and sort of had this sense of centuries of rhyme and centuries of this similar stories, as well, as you were saying at the beginning, such similar stories. Gorboduc is such an outlier in multiple ways that it is very exciting. And I was just going through the rest of this document to go, when do we stop rhyming again? When is that gonna happen again?
And the answer is no.
The answer is no.
I mean, actually, there is a serious
no
question.
Blank verse for you.
There's a serious question as we're coming to the end of this session of asking the question whether actually we need to look at the rest of the 1560s, whether we will gather much more new information, or whether we will simply repeat similar information, because there are a lot of examples of quite similar stuff going on. There are differences, and there are some things that we can argue are follow-ons from Gorboduc. But that's a question for our planning.
I think we could. and we could keep an eye out just for sort of where things are going, because the rhyming now still doesn't have the bouncy fun that we just had, for example, with the devil, or again, I'm thinking particularly the one with the gossips. So there's still a bouncy funness even in this, this stuff that is up against the up and coming blank verse iambic pentameter. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited. Like when was that our last 14er? Are we going to get more 14ers?
Oh, good. No, 14ers are here for a good decade or so before they start disappearing.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we're say early 1560s. The world is still very much in flux. Who knows if this monarch is going to last more than 5 years? The religion keeps flip flopping. Are we going to stick with this religion? And say 1560s. Is a relatively safe zone because, say, we don't know who the Queen's going to marry.
Right.
She's still young enough to marry and potentially have an heir. We do not know where that is going to go.
She is choosing a secret third option.
Yes. None of that is apparent at this point. And that means that diplomatically, England is in actually quite a good position because it's not quite being forced to take sides. That will change in the 1570s. Everything changes in the 1570s, which is frustrating because...
Is that when the Armada happened? Is that the Armada?
No, that is the point where Elizabeth gets excommunicated.
Oh, okay.
And that's, shall we say, the point also where you could say that the penny has dropped, that Elizabeth isn't going to marry anyone, and if she does, she's not probably going to bear children, and that changes the game. That changes the diplomatic game, and that changes the kind of image she projects as sovereign, and that will have an effect on the drama going forward to a degree. But also Elizabeth will enact more legislation, and that's going to change things quite significantly. But it's going to be for the drama we're looking at. Things are going to slowly shift through into the 1570s, and then there's going to be possibly one of the biggest things is going to happen in the 1580s.
Ooh.
I would actually more important than something that happens in the 1570s.
Ooh, okay.
I would argue that.
Come back, listeners.
Yes,
well,
I was going to say, we don't quite know how we're structuring this because, of course, this is a sort of ongoing series and we don't know quite whose podcast is going to host what. This is on our podcast, but we're sort of doing a do-si-do. And I think what I really I've really enjoyed about doing all of these sessions, and for all the weight of authority that I seem to have, with the way I speak and my voice here is, I am thinking aloud to a degree as we're doing this. I don't have a thesis per se coming into this. I'm bouncing off my memories of these plays and my memories of received wisdom, and also the other bits of history, and sort of trying to tease these things together. So I'm sure there are plenty of experts out there at various points going, that's an overreach, or no, you've got the date wrong, those kinds of things. And I think that's important to qualify the knowledge base I'm going with. But I think it's important that we can think aloud like this. I really like thinking aloud with you and your knowledge of the detail of verse, which I sort of just internalize and forget about.
Well, so this is the thing I would love on on Twitter.com.
The artist formerly known as Twitter.
Exactly. Please tweet out to either of our accounts, although you may see it more readily than I do. Any sort of actuallys would be welcome. But one of the things that I'm thinking, in fact, doesn't exist is exactly this sort of course that you and I are sort of taking each other on, which is let's look at it and experience it from inside, from outside, from our various knowledges, and try to sort of reconstruct what seems to be happening, what patterns we're seeing, what influences we're seeing. Because I, at least at the time of recording, which is the end of 2023, for any future grad students out there hoping for a date, I don't believe there are any choruses that exist that say, let's look and experience the whole of Anglophone drama and the way it changes and just sort of reflect and, in fact, do this work. Whereas I'm thinking in college, our university, I did something called the Great Books Program, which has some white supremacist undertone problems because it is very much about dead white men, Western literature, and nothing else. At the same time, this is a lot of the fundamental underpinning. And so every semester we moved from the Greeks through to about as close as we could get to the modern day, which was really not much more than briefly looking at the 1920s and 40s. But reading the philosophy, particularly, it was basically the philosophers all the way through and historians and major works of literature from the Greeks, very Eurocentric, obviously, and very Anglo-centric to as close as we could get, and not American-centric either. It was like English-centric. And you saw, I experienced sort of over those 4 years, the different movements, the way that people experienced stuff and were working and were speaking with each other. And I would love for this sort of course to exist for anyone who's interested in the real creation of Anglophone drama, and specifically for my purposes, those interested in verse drama and how it functions and changes. Because I'm absolutely seeing that, and I've been introduced to so many things I didn't think about. And again, what's on the page, it might look exactly the same as the previous one, and then you find this one reads easier. Why does it read easier? What is it doing that the other one, what are the small adjustments that make this easier to say and that one harder to say and this one exciting and that one, drivel? So if nothing else, I think that the sort of experiencing aloud is valuable because I don't think it's been done. If it has been done, actually, us on the artist formerly known as Twitter.
Well, I think the problem I've always had is that a lot of this work has been done, but it hasn't necessarily been done very publicly. It's not being shared in as wide a form as extensively. I mean, I think I am as completist as we can get, and in fact to the point that we are drifting into other literature as well. We have read every pre-17th century play.
Incredible.
I can say that with some authority now. But the designation of play is fluid. There are exceptions to that we haven't fully mapped out, just royal entertainments and other sort of random events where some performative thing happened.
Right.
Sometimes because we just can't get the text, and sometimes because it's just really fiddly. And we haven't quite got into masks enough yet, but that's not so much a problem for the Elizabethan because there aren't really that many extant texts. And it just becomes more of a slog the more you go into the 17th century because there's just more stuff.
Right.
But yes, to be able to bounce and say the words and see how they function, and because we got them recorded, people can listen to these plays in practice, because we have not only podcast versions, but if we don't have full productions, then we will have just a rough read through and things like that. So you can experience it on some level in a relatively plastic sense, which I don't think you could before.
I mean, it's that old thing of first of all, that the work that you're doing is incredible and is important. And you can be all British about it and be silly and be like, no, it's not, but it is. And two, even more valuable because these are performative works. And in order to understand whether they perform or not, they must be performed. You really can only tell so much theoretically from the page. The page is very important. I mean, I'm doing my thesis on the page, no, in more senses than one. But no, you can't tell if a thing is alive or not until you inhabit it and let it inhabit you. And so, yes, I think these recordings are important. And it's also wonderful that we're living at a time when recording is much more accessible, even with internet going down and whatnot, that there is YouTube, that there are podcasts, that we can be doing this remotely. And that people can access it as well. So and that it's free at least right now, unless everything
I
gets put behind.
I have put in place structures which makes it very difficult for someone in the future to make it not free. So in the event that I disappear, or some such and such institution ends up with all the hard copies, it's structurally difficult to put it behind a paywall. Some stuff initially is behind a paywall, and some of the more esoteric stuff lives behind the paywall. Because if I put the really obscure stuff behind a paywall, that's where all the money is, isn't it? It's such a good business model. But yeah, I mean, it's the whole point is there's no point trying to sell something that nobody knows they want to buy.
Yeah.
Because nobody's heard of half these plays, and even the ones they have, the market isn't very big. We've got to give it away for free because we're trying to build the audience that we can sell tickets for, and we can sell because that audience doesn't really exist. It sort of exists, but it's not really.
No, but they need to receive the samples, to know, this is fun. Because again, we've also been given the narrative that all of it is no good, that the only person worth exploring is the person whose name we don't say. And that's just not true. There were many very exciting things we read today and in previous sessions. Crazy thought. Good writers have always existed.
And again, the quality of what we define as good depends on what the show is trying to do. I mean, I don't think for a second that anyone would build a degree, a module on a degree about around the verse quality of Tom Tyler and his wife, but that doesn't mean it's not potentially a very interesting play and something that you could watch. I mean, especially something that is discussing themes that you could do a production that is not necessarily particularly early modern to look at what that play is doing with violence and things like that. And that's sort of that's where the Academy is not always an ally on certain fronts, because there is we are allies in the sense we're all interested in these texts, but our outcomes are actually different. So there are certain texts that always will, and quite legitimately will want to be studied because they have a density in what they're doing. So there is a centre of gravity for the Academy, whereas I'm very keen on fart jokes. Because
oh my gosh, that there was the shit joke.
Because it is a universal leveler, because everybody does it. I mean, there are very few it's a thing we don't do anymore, by and large, to say this is a universal text, and for lots of very good reasons. But when it's about poo,
everybody poos.
Everybody poos. So I am very keen on the more scatological texts for that very reason. Plus, I'm a child inside.
I mean, fair. Cool. Right. Well, I'm excited to see what else this brings, and again, to be schooled by you, to think aloud, and then let people hear it, and everyone can actually us, and then go and look at the. Oh heavens! Oh no! Don't look at these scripts yourselves. Oh no! Don't contact the Beyond company. To see if you can get these scripts and spread the word. Oh.
No, there isn't a secret Discord channel where all the scripts live. No, that doesn't exist at all.
No.
Well, before I close, would you like to just briefly remind our wonderful audience who you are and where you can be found?
Yes. I am Emily C A Synder. You can find me on all the socials, all of them, at Emily C A Synder, including new ones, new socials, as well as old socials. And I don't know where I am. We're in the social media wars at the end of 2023, and I'm just going and using Emily C A Synder on everything because no one else has those middle initials. You can also find me on my podcast, Hamlet to Hamilton, exploring verse drama. And we break down verse drama and take a look at sort of what makes it tick, both ancient and new.
And I have been your host, Robert Crichton. You can find me by Googling if you really want to. Find me on the internet for passive-aggressive abuse. You can find Beyond on all the socials at Beyond Shakes. That is our eternal designation. I do exist on social media, but I don't usually say anything particularly interesting. In fact, my own personal social media account, I mostly retweet about science fiction. I actually don't. I almost don't engage with my own job.
That's a great use of social media.
Yeah.
If only more people would do that.
Yeah. I try to squeeze into episodes as many random science fiction references to very obscure programs and just watch everyone be a bit confused as to why I said those things. And that's the game that gets me through the long, long, cold nights.
Oh, dear.
Well, it has been a delight as ever.
Same.
Until next time, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Potter's wheel.